You're listening to another Ambitious Entrepreneur Network.com podcast, the voice for entrepreneurs and small business. Now, onto the show.
You're listening to the award-winning podcast, The Ambitious Entrepreneur Show, featuring business leaders to help you navigate a constantly changing marketplace. Want to become known as a trusted authority while building a thriving business you love? The Ambitious Entrepreneur Show will show you how. Here's your host, Annemarie Cross.
And welcome to another episode of the Ambitious Entrepreneur Show, brought to you by the Influence Alliance, the business building community for coaches and change makers who want to build a sustainable and scalable business. I'm your host, Annemarie Cross. Now, joining me on today's show is Pancho Merohtra. Now, Pancho, he is a sales and negotiation trainer who has been helping business leaders and sales team take their businesses to new levels of sales success since 1991. Now, he uses sales influence and negotiation techniques that are based on psychological principles, and he teaches salespeople how to cold call. Yep, I said cold call, get meetings and close deals with profit. And his background in CBT allows him to teach people how to handle those rejections, deal with fear with amazing results. Now, specifically on today's show, Pancho is going to share why emotions, they go up and they go down like a roller coaster. He's going to share how we can break old, ineffective sales habits and how disconnection with certain types of people. I'm going to dive into that as well. So welcome, Pancho.
Welcome. Thank you so much, Annemarie. Nice to be here.
I think I just said a dirty word, obviously not to you, but that is cold call. You ask, and I get this all the time when you say that. People go, oh, cold calling. And it's often a love-hate relationship. But tell me, what is it that really, because I've seen your work on LinkedIn. If people are not yet following you, I highly recommend that they do, because the content that you share is so important, because, you know, we can be the best and offer the best product and service, yet if we're unable to push that into sales, we can have a flailing business. So what got you into this industry? Why do you love it so much?
Well, I've initially got into sales. I used to go up and down the country selling a whole bunch of stuff, from hardware to insurance. And I got into cold calling, primarily working in a call center. And I learned, actually, I started to enjoy it. And I thought this was the most fun I've had for a long time. And so I couldn't help myself. I used to get withdrawal symptoms if I couldn't call people. And I said, well, why is it I'm enjoying it and other people aren't? And it was actually I never had any expectations when I called someone. I was really, really keen to have a conversation with someone. And it was actually interesting because I came to this country about 30 years ago. Actually came from Auckland, New Zealand. And when you come to a country, what do? You work in a call center. So I worked at American Express for 2 or 3 years. And in those days, we had to call people. And I got very, very good at calling people cold and selling corporate cards. And so I left there and I set up my own call center, and we used to do all the cold calling for the tech companies and set up meetings for them. And over that period of time, I think I made about 220,000 cold calls. And so after a while, rejection really doesn't bother me at all. And in my mindset, it was more like if it was a no today, it possibly wasn't going to be a no tomorrow. So I never took offense to that, and I actually enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun. And
wow, you've got someone else here, Maker Schroeder, who says cold calling is still important as you connect with people on a different level in her view. So, and it is true, isn't it? And I'm sure you've learned along the way that It really, and I love the way that you said it really is a conversation. And just
Yeah.
like any conversation, you can approach how you approach that conversation is also going to impact and mindset. And I know that you speak a lot about mindset too. I mean, you love it. It's almost like a game. It's almost like, what is this conversation going to turn out into? And I'd imagine that you were able to track that there were a portion of people who would say yes, and then there were a portion of people that it took time, over amount of time. What was the greatest insight that you learned around cold calling that you continue to share with your clients? And once they get it, they can start to recognize that, hey, this is just a conversation, and almost thinking that, hey, this is quite fun as well. What's that insight that you can share?
Well, there's actually 2 or 3 insights. One of the key things is one of the most important things about us and really impacts on your mindset is to know your numbers. After a while, I could predict what results I would get even before I even started a cold calling session. And so, for example, I have a tracking system that allows me to know that if I'm ever doing it, if I make an average between 27 to 30 calls, I'm going to have on average around about 5 to 7 conversations. I'm going to get 3 to 4 meetings, and I'll get 2 deals. And it's so predictive over so many years that my statistics don't change. So that gives me a great deal of comfort within myself. And every time I pick up someone, and whether they say yes, it's a non-interested, it's a wrong number, incorrect person, incorrect, whatever, I know that the numbers work in my favor all the time. And because I have total belief and comfort in what I'm doing, I don't operate from any kind of fear or anxiety that every dial is life or death. It doesn't operate that way. And when you remove that kind of anxiety,
there are a certain amount of calls that you need to make, and then predictively, if that's a term that we use, you're going to get so many meetings and so many yeses. So let's get to that quota or that number.
Yeah, and then what I started to do is I started to look at how language works in getting people, let's just say, excited to meet with me over the phone. And so it took me around about 55 hours working with a very good friend of mine, and we developed a script, like a call track, and it boils down to nearly 25 to 30 seconds, and my appointment ratio on that script is close to 80%. But it took 55 hours to develop, and so we pulled it apart. And one of the most important things was looking at how a rational word, you have to remove that from what you say and develop a corresponding emotional word that means the same thing. And the responses are just phenomenal when you know how to actually say it, the right kind of pauses, when you let a person process it, and how you gently lead them to saying, yeah, I want to meet with you. And it's
Give us one example of one of those words where you change it more to the emotion.
Well, it's like cost. And people say, yeah, it's going to cost you a lot, versus saying uncertainty about the value. And when you use certain keywords, it triggers a response in that person that they can't actually control. So in effect, people will say I'm a bit of a control freak, but to a certain extent I may be, but I want to be in control of the conversation. I want to be able to direct the person's thoughts to what I want them to do. And that's a big part of how I train salespeople on, the art of framing a conversation so you get what you want. And invariably, the client will get what they want as well if they're qualified.
Yeah, and I like the way that you've said that, because I know that we've spoken offline about the word influence, and it's interesting how that can trigger people. I mean, humans are interesting human beings, aren't they? And how they respond. And we're talking about influencing in from an integral point of view, because if your person who you're speaking to, a prospective customer, is having a challenge, ultimately, Pancho, that if they were to invest in themselves, in your program and in themselves,
Yes.
they're going to be able to achieve better results, guaranteed. You've proved it. You've got clients that have done that. However, in between them getting to that stage, there's a whole lot of mental clutter and things, obstacles and concerns and what you love to be able to help people overcome those objections. When they move through that, they're able to get to that yes to themselves. And we've got to be able to navigate that, don't we? And often we don't do that very well as salespeople.
Yeah, I think the client's got to be able to say yes to himself.
Yeah.
And inside their mind. And you'll often see people, when you start to trigger the right kind of thoughts and emotions in a person, especially over Zoom calls, is you start to see non-verbal signals coming through. And so, being a salesperson, you've got to develop your observational skills a lot more than what most people realize. You've got to be able to listen between what the hidden meaning is behind what people are saying. I think people take what people say too literally, and you've got to learn the art of listening, because if you can listen well, then you can influence really, really well. And a lot of people miss signals because they're mostly in their head trying to think about what clever thing they can say, instead of actually listening to the client and figuring out what really matters to the client.
Yeah. And, this beautifully segues into one of the points that you wanted to talk about, why emotions go up and down like a roller coaster. If we look at it at that point of view, because I can relate to that. I mean, I might be having a call with someone and then I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness, now it's getting to the overcoming objections. And there's so much going on in my head and conversations in my head that I'm not present with the conversation that's going, in, and we can inadvertently break that rapport. So share more of that. How can we get to a stage where we can say, I love sales conversations, I love objections, because I've got colleagues that say that too, and I love cold calling. So what are some things that we can do?
Well, I think the overriding thought process you must have in your head is that you're really there to help the client. And if all your directions and all your conversations are geared around helping that person, whether they go ahead with you or not, removes a lot of the anxiety you have about closing the deal. And so if your whole focus is, how can I help this person? When you come across like that, it removes your right to be right all the time. You're willing to engage in conversation. You're engaged in, imagine you're having a talk with a friend, instead of you don't try and sell your friend on something. No. You really, when you're talking to a friend of yours, a close friend, you're not trying to sell your viewpoint. You're there to listen. You're there to ask questions. You're there to be truthful, and you're not there to sugarcoat things either. And so I think it's really important to have very honest conversations with people, because it just minimizes going down a tangent, and also being honest with the client. If you can't help them, then the best thing is to finish the call. And I think I often find being truthful and honest is probably the most important thing. It minimizes the waste of time on every person, and time is money, as I say it as well.
I think that in itself is huge for some people, because if you were to be there listening to their conversation, you would probably recognize that the person to whom they're speaking with is just not ready. And what we often will do is we'll attract the not so ready people. And if we recognize, look, I could talk for 10 hours, this person it's just not ready. We need to learn and say, well, we need to next. And so often and because we will bring that down to ourselves, well, I'm just no good at sales, no one's interested in my product, that person was just not ready. What are some other things that you say? I mean, that in itself is going to be huge for some people. You're talking to the wrong people, recognize the right people, and then focus on having conversations with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think understanding, and this is understanding yourself, who you are, your values, is really, really important, because we can actually, just going back to that key point, we can sell to the wrong people, we can work with the wrong people, and at the end of the day, it's wasting everyone's time because they're not invested in actually putting the effort into making change. And this all this stuff, it's a vicious cycle, and it doesn't help anyone. And I think really doing a bit of introspection on your own values and beliefs is really, really important, because I see so many people burning emotional energy, and because you can go down one path working with certain clients that suit what you do, and going down another path and whereby you're just pushing, it's resistance. You feel like you're pushing and they're pushing back against you. And so this emotional roller coaster happens because sometimes we just don't actually know ourselves enough to go, this is what I stand for, this is what I will not stand for. Having very, very clear boundaries is really, really important, because when we don't have clear boundaries, our decision making is flawed. We get impacted by our own emotions, and we take other people's viewpoint as being real, and it really affects us. And it takes a long time for us to go from being totally dysfunctional to become functional again. And this is the psychological aspects of really, you need to know yourself really intimately, like your best friend. And this creates either, as they say, the heaven is either created in the head or a hell, and it really depends on how you run yourself.
Yeah, so true. And, often you'll find that the clients that you take on board, there's an inkling there, there's a gut feeling, there's intuition, whatever you want to call it. Often we can backtrack, isn't it, to that moment that really we could see, hey, these are not our best clients.
And we live in regret.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And that can impact, how you show up, and, so we certainly don't want to do that. Something else that I would love you to speak into, Pancho, and this is something that, for me, it was a huge lesson, is that when you look at, say, the customer journey, buyer journey, whatever you want to call that, when you meet someone initially, that may very well be the first port of call. That relationship, for some people, they may be right there ready, they're just waiting for the right person to come along, and then here you are providing this incredible solution. Yep, let's do it, Pancho. But then the majority of people, it's a dance, it's a relationship, isn't it? And so often, maybe it's just me, that if I didn't make the sale at that time, what's wrong with me? But it really can be a number of stages. Don't beat yourself up if you're not closing the deal on that first conversation. Can you speak a little bit into this? Because this is important to recognize too.
Yeah, one of the most important things that any salesperson should know, and every sales manager or anyone running a team, is to have a very clearly defined value proposition that you actually you can clearly enunciate to your clients. What value will you actually bring to the relationship? And usually pain and value go hand in hand. So a lot of people talk about that you shouldn't be hitting on people's pains. Well, in sales, 80 to 90% of people really have, they're talking to you because they've got a challenge, they've got a situation, they have a problem that they need to fix. And your value proposition has got to be has got to be really aligned to fixing that problem, because usually this is where the motivation kicks in. I want to fix this problem. Who can fix it for me? Can you fix it for me? And can you clearly communicate your value proposition in a way that the client goes, yep, I see you as the person that can fix it. Let's work together.
Yeah. You know what I love about that? And it's not being pushy, but rather if they could have fixed it themselves, they would have done. Wouldn't be speaking to you. And there's a whole lot of clutter going on in their own minds that, is this for me? Am I able to do that? And if you know that you're sitting in front of your ideal client, and if they say yes to themselves, you are going to help them to be able to shift whatever it is that they're looking to be shifted and achieve, then you're doing them in disjustice or in not being of service if you don't say, hey, let's do this. Let's just, what are the costs of you not doing that? And let's make action today. And if you, or whatever it is that you're bringing that forward. And I think by not doing that, sometimes that's all a person needs, isn't it?
Yeah. I like, if I was to give a piece of advice around developing your value proposition, is to really know the market that you're working in intimately. Understand not just the rational aspects of why a person would want to work with you. They want to make money, etc., but the emotional aspects of that person has to be known as well. The stress, the time away from family, the pressure they feel. These are all very, very powerful drivers in a person's decision making. Not only the rational, but often the irrational plays a huge part in a person's decision making. And I've often said one of the most important attributes that you need to understand about psychology or about people is their need for self-preservation. And if you understand that everyone operates out of self-preservation, and we saw that last year in COVID with the irrational behavior of people, buying toilet rolls and hoarding food. Well, that's a display of self-preservation. And so people will do anything to keep themselves safe, their family safe. They'll do things that you normally wouldn't expect anyone to do. Now, if you understand that line of thinking, and you think about every person that you are going to call, and you are developing like a psychological profile of that person, and you start to understand their drivers, their fears, their desires, then you start to gain it's like psych profiling of a person. Go, okay, how does this person work? What am I going to say that is going to trigger the right response? What's going on in their life outside of work? What's going on in their work? How do they relate to their colleagues? Now, what you're doing is you're building a blueprint of this person's psychological profile, and that becomes a really, really important aspect when you're having a conversation, because the conversation not just about business, but it's about life in general.
Yeah, so true. And I would imagine, and I'm going to ask you some of the ineffective sales habits that you consistently see and that you help people break through. But I would imagine when you start to gain information about that blueprint, that helps you also too down the track when that person does say yes, that you're hitting all of the right markers to support them in the best way through, and what they're really looking for. And for some people, when you tap into that, it's such an instant yes. It's like, I wish I started this like months ago, isn't it? Often people, I wish I'd have met you months ago.
It's these triggers, and everyone has them. And if you can, through very, very, what I call very clever questioning processes that we teach our people, it's not the usual sales type of process. You identify these little triggers, and they happen consistently with people. People are very consistent with their decision making if you know how. And one of the most important things about decision making is that 99% of most people base their decisions on past strategies. So that's one of the reasons why people don't change. They always make a decision based upon how they made a decision previously. And if you can understand these little markers, then you can actually, that's why it's so important, as one of the most important things in sales, is to be curious about people.
Yeah.
And when you start becoming curious about people, you start asking people about their past. And if you are structured enough, you'll ask specific questions about how they've actually made decisions, and you'll start to actually get a code, like a operating manual for how this person actually makes decisions, how they get motivated, and then you start to tick these little triggers, and suddenly they're going, how did you know? And they often say things like, "Gee, are you reading my mind?" It's just. It's a very easy way to actually make sales when you start to connect to people's past.
Yeah. It's interesting you share that, and then I'm going to dive in and ask you about some ineffective sales habits so we can recognize them before they happen and hopefully break through them. But it's interesting you say that. It is so true, because I remember years ago when I was doing my NLP training, we were able to recognize that we have different systems that we run with, and you can actually see the different systems just through watching the eyes and the maneuvers. And so my purchase habits, and this is one that we kind of changed for me, was I would see a piece of jewelry, I would look at it, and I would go in my mind, oh, that looks nice, I'm going to get it. So what they ended up doing was, that piece of jewelry looks nice. Do I really need it? Or maybe, I've got the other 10 that are sitting in the cupboard, and no, I don't really need it. So, my husband didn't know about that, but thank you. So, but it's interesting when you recognize some of these patterns, you're able then to enhance. And obviously in my instance, you can change some of those so that you don't buy a lot of jewelry that's necessarily sitting in the cupboard. All right, let's talk about some of these ineffective sales habits. What are some of these that we need to know?
Well, one of the most, and you said interesting word, patterns. So habits are patterns, right? They're repeating. You don't really have to work very hard with them. They're automatic responses. So one of the habits that I see with people is giving up real quick. From a calling session. And the other habit is buying into other people's negativity. That's a habit.
That's interesting to say that, because I don't think people would have recognized that that's a habit.
Yeah.
But it's true.
And it becomes a dysfunctional habit. And it takes a long time to beat a habit. And at the end of the day, what I often say is that you can't actually get rid of most habits. You have to create new ones. So one of the habits that I've seen with salespeople is the habit of succumbing to their competition. Believing everything they hear. And these habits are really, really subtle, but they have a huge impact on our performance. And so you want to understand these habits. And I know I'm going down the way of talking about negative habits, but they are so powerful and they impact on our performance no end. Not willing, procrastination is a habit.
Yeah.
You don't want to pick up the phone because you're feeling that you're going to be rejected. Rejection becomes, you're kind of saying, I'm going to be rejected every time I make the phone call. So why should I make the phone call? And, and I see a lot of people just make phone calls just to say, I've done it, but there's no really clear intention about the phone call.
Yeah.
And so when we look at habits, they are so unconscious that we don't even know we're doing it. And it just becomes, what's your habitual way to respond? So habits sit in the middle between stimulus and response. So we're just responding without any thought process. Oh, this is going to be a waste of my time. I'm making phone calls. This is a waste of my time. And what we're doing is we're just cementing a bad habit. And it becomes such a, people look at the phone and they think it's their worst enemy. And they avoid it. So procrastination.
This is a great camera. Isn't it? I use it as phone or social media. But what's interesting about that, and so often is changing a habit. Again, is how long is a piece of string to create a new habit? I would imagine that it's going to depend on a number of different things. But the most important thing, and I can really sense this coming across, so I'd love you to speak a little bit about this, is the beliefs, the mindset, what you shared earlier on. Because if you continue to believe something, then you're going to seek the evidence to prove your belief is true. So if you think cold calling, if you think you're going to get rejected, guess what? You're going to miss that feedback from a customer or potential customer that they're interested. You may just completely bypass that over and not dive deeper into that conversation. How do we go about changing that belief then?
Okay, well, this is where it's advisable to have someone that you can actually talk to about it. So, hey, because we're so involved in the picture, we can't see what we're doing. And if you have a sales manager or you have a mentor, or you have someone from the outside, and you can talk about this, because this is a problem and it needs a different viewpoint. It needs different type of thinking to solve it. So, one way you can try and solve it yourself is to really ask yourself a key question. Is it really true that everyone's going to say no to me? Is it really true? Is it a fact? And so, and I find that if you do this little exercise, is it true? Is it a fact? And just write it on a piece of paper, your answers, and start looking at your answers. And then you'll start to see that it's not actually a fact. You've actually made phone calls, that you have had positive responses, and you have moved forward with the deal. So it's not actually true. So you start to, a lot of CBT is about debating your thoughts.
Yeah.
And so is the thought that you're actually thinking actually true?
Yes.
So, and we can catastrophize all these, they become bigger than Ben-Hur. Oh my God. So a lot of CBT is about challenging your existing thought. So challenge your thought yourself. I mean, isn't sales all about challenging people's viewpoints? And until you have the confidence to challenge someone's viewpoint, you can't change your own.
Yeah. What I love about what you've just said, and I think it's so important too, is to get a third party, someone such as yourself, to be able to look at kind of the steps that you're taking, the process, is because we're so close, we may not see that some of the things that we are doing are brilliant. So we end up trying to change something, which we go, no, that's okay. Actually, it's a couple of steps beforehand that we need to change. And I'd imagine that when we look at, just the whole change in the way that we're looking at sales, it's having a conversation and seeing, how can I be of service? How can I support this client? And if that person is saying no now, and I love that you said this earlier, and I'm going to bring this back into this conversation because this is going to challenge some of the beliefs as well, is that it's not yet. The timing is not right yet. Well, can I follow up with you in a couple of months? Let's get a date in the calendar. These are all little things that we can start to break the pattern of no one wants to purchase. My product or service is no good. Can I also ask you this? And do you find that when it comes to the cold calling and everything that we've spoken about today, that both men and women struggle with this? Because I know when it talks about imposter syndrome, we women think that we own that space, but I'm quite surprised to hear that a lot of men can also deal with imposter syndrome, but they just get over themselves and do it anyway. So that's something that we can learn. But do you find men and women struggle with this?
Absolutely. It's not sort of one gender doesn't have it over the other gender, and
so it's an equal playing space. We don't own that space either.
No one owns that space. People, all types of people own that space, and this is probably, I would say, is the people who can get beyond this are the people that do amazing things when in their sales careers. They progress really, really well because this is overcoming one imagined fear that is become real. And as I said, there's only two types of fear: real fear, which is like a cricket ball coming at you at 100 miles an hour, or imagined fear. And so you have to be able to go, okay, and this is about understanding what you can control, what you can't control. So, give up trying to control everything and control what you can do. And this is an important aspect of actually enjoying what you do without the anxiety.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are listening and just coming in and watching, go back and replay this once we finish the live. And the reason I say that is because one of the things that you said, Pancho, and I want to bring this up just to remind people again, and then we're going to talk about disconnection with certain types of people. But what you said, you've got this formula, and without a shadow of a doubt that this formula works. And that's so many amount of calls that you make, turns into so many conversations, turns into so many yeses.
Yes.
And then we realize, take the emotion out of it, just make those calls, but do it strategically. Do the things that we mentioned so that you know that you are coming to that conversation in the best possible way. And those figures will continue to roll out for you. Just do the work. Get over yourself and do the work. That's what I say. Just get over yourself and do it. Prove your shonky belief is untrue, and then let the figures start to change that belief as well. Hey, what Pancho said is right. Well, let's roll out another 30 cold calls.
Yeah, it's what people say: focus on the process instead of the outcome, instead of the end result all the time. And so it's a lot. I do a lot of work in the area of sports, and this is the same thing. Is you focus on your processes don't worry about the end result. Imagine if you had to just worry, oh my God, I'm going to win this match. I'm going to win this match. If that's all that's occupying your mind, you can't focus on what you have to do point by point, point by point. And so you have a choice with your mind. What do you focus on? And if you focus on, having a really good conversation, and migrating the client towards a conclusion, whether it's to go ahead with you or not, is a good win for you either way.
Yeah. For some people, when they're looking at what conversations that they're having, one of the key indicators or gaps, if you will, is that you haven't got enough conversations booked into your calendar.
Absolutely.
To be able to do that. Well, in that fact, what are you doing to get people into your calendar? Maybe you need to increase that, because out of 50 connections, you get 30 opportunities to. And so these are the kind of things that we can't track and monitor. And this is the Ambitious Entrepreneur Show. We know we're competitive. Let's just face it. Why not have the competitiveness as how many calls can I get this week? Can I improve that? Can I tweak that process? Because last time, I can see that my conversion rate is actually getting better. What can I do to streamline that even further? Let that be where we continue to evolve and to perfect.
I was going to say, and if you improve your conversion rate, your influence rate also increases. So it's a catch-22. The more sort of conversations you have, the better you get at actually influencing people. But it's just that you're stepping into the big game a lot more, and you have a chance to now improve the other aspects of your deal making, which is when you're negotiating and influencing people. The more conversations leads to more meetings, leads to more skills being utilized in those areas. So I hate to practice in game day. Yes. I don't like doing that.
Oh, absolutely.
You don't correct a swing, because my background's in tennis. You don't correct a service swing in a match.
Yeah.
That should have been done on the practice court.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to be winging things. At some side, yes, you have to improvise, but the real key thing is, if you are meeting more people, you will become better at negotiating and influencing to close deals.
Yes.
It requires both to be working hand in hand. And if we're talking about the third point, which is about understanding why we disconnect with certain types of people. Well, the real key thing I find is that the five senses create different perceptions of reality in people.
Mm-hmm. Share more about that.
Okay, so if we look at our five senses, this is what we use to interpret the world. And so I won't go into too much detail, but if I am thinking, if I'm a very, very, say, a person that likes a lot of logic, I'm listening for logical type of conversations. And that's how I make sense of the conversation I have between you and I. So I have to be able to speak and communicate and use my body language and use my presentation in a way that is matching and connecting on your level of thought process. So how do I present my information in a way that connects to a person who is very much geared around making decisions logically, and maybe they need to feel it as well. So how do I do that? So it's just like, for example, if there's a car accident, the police will get multiple witnesses because everyone sees what happened differently.
Yeah.
And so you'll have different witnesses looking at this and going, actually, I saw this happen. And then police have got to try and make some kind of sense out of all the information they've got. So a person's brain, when you're talking to them, you have to understand how the disconnection is happening. And disconnection always happens on a communication level. I don't get you, you don't get me, let's not talk anymore, even though your service is really, really, really good. It's one of the reasons why we found people go to multiple salespeople who serve the same industry, but they're searching for a connection. But what they're really searching for is someone who actually understands them, understands how they think.
Yes, makes so much sense. And you need to be aware of that, don't you? Because that's one of those aspects that you want to have on that profile, that blueprint that you are
Yeah.
documenting and getting information. Because if you're very much a big vision person, yet the person you're speaking to likes the logic, they want to know the ins and outs, some of the statistics, the validating
Yeah.
aspect of your product or service. If you're talking about something that just has no real validation to them, there's just going to be no connection there, is there? And there's certainly not going to be a yes at the end of that conversation.
Well, exactly. I mean, if we're talking about language, language is more than just words. It's a currency of meaning, and you must be able to understand, because people can say one thing and mean another. I can say stop, or I can say stop, and you have a different interpretation, right? And so, what you mentioned is that if I'm talking to a person who's very big picture, it's just like, for example, I do a lot of work in the automotive industry as well. And when I went to buy my car, all I really wanted to know is, and the car comes with, hundreds of features, but all I really wanted to know is 3 or 4 things that the car can do for me, and that's all I wanted to know.
Yes.
That's all I needed. Big picture. I don't want to know everything, because I just won't be interested. Yeah. And so you get some salespeople feature dumping, hoping something will stick, but they've never taken a step back to actually develop a strategic opening process to actually identify how the client thinks, what would motivate the client to make a decision and not make a decision, which is just as important. What is the way they make a decision, and then presenting it in a way that they don't have to think too much about it. Because what we do know about people, and when I get involved in negotiation, is people don't want to work hard to make a decision. Yeah. They want it, everyone wants it easy, but we tend to complicate things.
Yeah. And I guess that's where we hear that saying, don't overwhelm the prospective client, because an overwhelmed person will say no. So if they're there because they want you to support them and getting to a yes or even a no, and as you said, either is fine, you just don't want to deliver it up in the air. But if it's so overwhelming, because as consumers, if we feel so overwhelmed by a prospective supplier, we're going to say no, because especially if one of the reasons why we're wanting support is because we feel overwhelmed.
Yes.
In ourselves. So
and that's really a very important thing to think about. And one thing I will say is, why we disconnect with people is that we're not actually reading the signals of a client very well. So, for example, what I do is I teach people how to read people and profile people. But one of the most important things is, while people think it's really, really important to get yeses from a client, it's just as important to get no's from a client as well. Okay, and let me explain that a little bit further. When I'm talking to a client, I'm actually there's a lot more going on that I'm trying to understand from the client. I'm trying to understand, when they say yes, do they really mean yes? When they say no, do they really mean no? Because sometimes a no can mean a yes, and sometimes a yes can mean a no.
Oh my goodness. And that's where, now, is this yes a yes, or is it really a no?
Yeah. Well, think about it this way. If I say to someone, yeah, this is something that would make sense for you to go ahead, and they go,
oh yeah.
And then you go, no. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
So at the start of a meeting with a client, I will very deliberately ask questions that gives me a firm yes, where yes means a yes. Then I will also ask certain questions, and this frightens a lot of salespeople, where I get no's, and very defined no's. So I can tell the difference when I'm going through the whole sales process with a client, when I'm getting a yes, but it's sounding like a no.
Yes.
And this is the art of listening, but also deal making. So I get involved in a lot of advising on significant type of deals, and you really need to be able to listen to signals from people that mean one thing but say another. It's like the headline and the sub-headline have different meanings.
Yeah, and so, makes so much sense. And those nuances, if you miss them, there's no point. It's like some of those cold callers. How are you today? Is it a nice day? If you listen, good. good. You know?
Yeah. I,
And is that Mr. Cross? Do I
yeah,
sound
yeah,
Mr.
yeah.
No.
I've often cold called, and people laugh at this technique. I often cold call people and tell them this is actually a cold call,
Yeah.
and people go, oh yeah, okay. You'll be surprised how many people take the conversation when you just tell them, I actually don't know you. This is a cold call. You give me 60 seconds, and and if it's worthwhile, let's keep talking. And they go, yeah. You have no idea how well that works. Just tell
Yes.
them.
Yeah. And I like that approach because you know that you're going into a script. Because sometimes if you ask or you say something, you can just tell, oh, hang on a minute, that's point number 4. I've got to go back to point number 2,
Yeah.
written it just like, oh, and they haven't read because it's kind of like, actually, you know what? I really did need my carpets cleaned,
Yeah.
or whatever it may be,
Yeah.
So, look, I know that we have just scratched the surface, Pancho, and this is an area I think in business that no matter what level that we're at, we can always improve, we can always develop. And as I know many entrepreneurs, you may be getting team in to be able to take over. The last interview that I had, we were talking about, going from entrepreneur to CEO and leading a team. And I know that that's another area that you really support as well too. Is, are we surrounding ourselves with the right team, and are we training them in the proper way? How can people find out more about you and about the work you do? And Maker is just saying, she's had a couple of comments there. Thank you so much for being there. This is brilliant. Thank you. It certainly has today. We've been provided with so much value from Pancho. But Pancho, how can people connect with you?
Oh, obviously, they can go to LinkedIn and connect with me there, or on Instagram. They can send an email directly to me at support@frontierp.com.au. We've got, as a thank you, we've got a couple of tools that we provide a lot of salespeople we work with, which is a weekly focus worksheet, which really helps you to get focus on what you've got to do on a weekly basis. And it helps you to learn and grow every week with your goals. And I actually have a guide that I developed, which is on the 7 psychological mistakes that salespeople make and how to fix them. If they go to the website, they can get a free copy, and that will actually give you some insights into certain areas about how to change habits, certain areas around what you can do to actually change what you do on a weekly basis and address some key areas psychologically that, if you started to work on them, would have a profound impact on how successful you become in sales. And this is a constant thing. It's about continuous improvement. Nothing's ever done in stone. So they can send me an email, or I think I've just been told you can send me an email at support@frontierp.com.au, and I'm giving away these free templates. They're quite valuable for people if they want to improve themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can certainly recommend to people connect with you, Pancho, on LinkedIn, because you regularly share videos and other content that really has us thinking. I love those posts that really have you sit there think, I need to contemplate this for a bit. And as we know, we're dealing with humans, and with humans, we bring a whole lot of complexities, and it depending on what day it is and all of that kind of stuff, what's happening in our lives. And so when we are able to really support ourselves and getting the right mindset and having the right tools in place and just get into action in the right way, I know that the results will speak for themselves. So
I just want to mention one thing. I actually run a session on the brain science of appointment setting, which looks at the mindset, but also it looks at particular types of ways how you can frame your scripts. And so it addresses this area, but also what you say. And this might be a course that some of the listeners might want to specifically look for themselves or their teams on actually developing a calling strategy of cold calling to get more leads and deals coming through the table.
Yeah. And I think, with what's going on and so many more businesses going online, I would say to people, yes, certainly embrace that. But now people crave more of that connection. And it would be the calls. And this is also important on Zoom as well, because you may have an opportunity to have that face-to-face. Don't miss out on the nuances that are coming through the screen, and especially your own as well. You need to be mindful of what you're communicating to that prospective customer too. And oh, look, I think it's all fascinating. That's one of the reasons why I love doing this show. I learned so much from my awesome guests, and I certainly have today. So thanks once again, Pancho, for coming on the show.
It was a pleasure for my end as well. Thank you, Annemarie.
Now, before I go, just another stand out, be heard, and influence tip for the week. My question to you is, do you want to become known as a trusted authority in your industry? And if it is, then you've probably heard me say before that it's important to position yourself as a category of one, so that you become the choice versus just a choice with your ideal client. And that is key. So here are some things that I just want to share. 5 things really briefly. These are the things that you should be doing to not only position yourself as a trusted authority, but to be distinguishable, uncopyable, and irresistible to your ideal client. You need to be clear on the relevant, what I call milestones and markers. These are the challenges that you've overcome, which your ideal client may now be faced with. And you want to include that in your story and obviously in the content that you continue to share, because that validates you as being someone who can certainly support your ideal client through their journey. Now, is it impossible for someone to take your introduction, your content, your story, take your name out of it and put their name in? Because if it is, you're not uncopyable, you're copyable. So you need to dive deeper into some of those things which only you can share in your story. Let's talk about your IP, your intellectual property, and what you teach and share with your clients. Is it woven into your unique story so that, again, no one can copy what you're sharing as part of your content and your storytelling journey, your milestones and your markers? Are you able to weave those milestones and markers into short stories, into longer stories, or if you're doing a really long overview, that's woven through nicely as well? This all continues to position why you are the choice and not just a choice. And of course, have you created some of those unique slogans and sayings, which again validate what you're sharing is so important? And if it challenges the status quo, if it addresses the BS or the elephant in the room that no one else in your industry is sharing, then that certainly positions you ahead of everyone else. How did you go? Did you answer yes to all of them, or maybe some of them? And if not, this is something that you are struggling with, let's get on a call together. And actually, I've put together a masterclass, and this is talking about some of the key things that you need to have in place, and we'll be able to help you on that. All you need to do is go to industrythoughtleaderacademy.com/distinguishable message, industrythoughtleaderacademy.com/distinguishable message. Have a fantastic week.
This podcast is brought to you by theinfluencealliance.com. Want to influence real change with your message by becoming known as a trusted authority in your industry while building a sustainable and scalable business you love? Find out how by accessing our free podcast series at www.theinfluencealliance.com/podcast series. That's theinfluencealliance.com/podcast series.